This video is brought to you by Babbel. Learn a new language through real-life conversations. Nobody knew how the painting came down off the wall. Fingers were pointed, the dog was accused, but in the end it did not matter. What did, however, was that a beautiful little abstract painting by Leroy Turner had now lost its rhythm, its motion and movement, and the focus of the painting was now the gaping hole in the center. Executed on a very thin piece of cardboard, this was a painting that was slightly different than the normal on canvas. The task at hand was to address the damage, conserve the piece, and work to make sure that the rhythm was restored. Leroy Turner is known for his vibrant modern abstractions, primarily from the 20s through about the 50s, and his artwork emphasizes a really lyrical form of cubism and was often inspired by visual interpretations of classic music, for which many of pieces are named. Towards the late 20s, he became influenced by the cubism of Picasso, Georges Braque, Juan Gris, and Paul Klee, and in 1928 he traveled to Europe to study in Paris. In 1936, Turner was one of very few Americans allowed to join the prestigious European avant-garde painting group Abstraction Création, founded in Paris in 1931 to counteract the rise of Surrealism, and that included Piet Mondrian, Jean Arp, and Albert Glaze, among others, and they aimed to promote the concepts of modern, geometric, non-figurative abstract painting. His time in Paris is also evident in some of the titles that he gave his works, and while I'm sure he picked up a little bit of French in studios and cafes, how romantic, he may have had an easier time with Babbel. When I learned French, it wasn't in cafes, it was in high school, and it's been a long time. And I have an upcoming trip, and I'd like to be able to say more than "where is the bathroom?" So it's time for a review. After selecting your language, Babbel will ask you a few questions to gauge your proficiency. And this ensures that the classes you'll take are perfectly suited with your abilities, and that means you're going to have a better chance at success. And Babbel even offers live classes with real people if that's how you learn best. And because we all learn a little bit differently, Babbel allows you to customize when and where and at what pace you learn, so that you have control over how you develop your language skills. But it's not all just lessons. With Babbel Explore, you can listen to podcasts in foreign languages while you work, while you cook, or just go for a walk so that you can expand your learning. And if that's not enough, Babbel even has games in foreign languages to make the learning really fun. So when you're ready to prepare for that vacation, connect with loved ones, or just challenge yourself, head over to Babbel, where you can get 60% off on your subscription by clicking the link below.
J'aurais aimé avoir Babbel quand j'apprenais le français.
Once the painting and the frame have been separated, I'm going to remove these little blocks that were installed by the framer to facilitate the framing. I'll replace them later, but for now I need access to the back of the painting, and these blocks stand in their way. Luckily for me, the framer didn't do anything crazy, and they're just held on with a few little spots of adhesive, so they pop right off, sometimes with almost no effort. When this board was damaged and the loss occurred, it was also deformed, and some of the areas around the hole are kind of messed up, and so I want to press them flat so that I can work on them later. I'm taking some distilled water and a cotton blotter paper. This is just a 100% rag cotton paper that is acid-free and used in printmaking and other arts, and I'm laying down a couple of layers and then putting a weight on it. That's it. Now, while the board is under pressure, I'm taking some more of that cotton rag paper, tearing it up, and placing it in a jar of distilled water. I want this paper to slowly dissolve and come apart for the repair that I'm going to be doing later. While that paper is in the water, I can change out the blotter paper to a piece of dry blotter paper and start to draw out some of the moisture that I just introduced to the board. Returning to the paper, I'm going to start breaking it up by hand because I need to turn this paper into pulp for the repair process. You see, I'm going to be making my own paper, and simply letting it soak in water does a lot, but sometimes the paper sticks together and it doesn't really fall apart, so working it by hand is critically important. And again, I'm coming back to the board, changing out the blotter paper, and removing any of that extra moisture that was introduced because I need the board to be dry and flat. Now, turning to the kitchen. No, we're not going there. This time I've brought the kitchen to the studio in the form of my blender from home. Now, to make paper, you can use any number of devices. You can use your hands, you can use a beater, which is a device specifically designed to beat the paper into a pulp. Sounds funny, but it's an amazing device. Or you can use a blender. Now, a blender will cut the paper up, so it's not ideal, but a beater is a single-use tool, and unless you're making a lot of paper, it's really not something that one would have access to or really need. And since I don't make a lot of paper, I don't need it, and my blender will suffice, even if it's imperfect. I'm going to pulse the paper over and over and over again and turn it into pulp. I want to break up all of those fibers and turn it into a slurry of water and paper, because that's how you make paper. Dumping it into my bowl, I can then start to examine it and feel if it's the right consistency. It may look right, but it needs to feel right. I'll take a small section of it and I'll transfer it to a little container, and then I'll add a couple of scoops of methyl cellulose, which is used everywhere in life, in food, in makeup, in conservation, as an adhesive. It is a binder, and when mixed with this paper pulp, it will ensure that the fibers of the paper stick together and stick to the original board. Now, on to the repair. But before I can start working this paper pulp into the void, I need to prepare the void. I'm taking a brush and dipping it in the methyl cellulose, and then I'm going to start painting it on the board. Not all over, just on the edges where the damage was. Effectively, I'm going to be priming these areas and getting them ready to receive the paper pulp. If they were completely dry, they would start to draw out most of the moisture from the damp paper pulp. In addition, the methyl cellulose allows them to be a little bit sticky, so it helps the bond between the new paper pulp and the original board, and that's what I want, it to stick into place. I'll take some of the paper pulp and squeeze out just a little bit of moisture. I don't want it soaking wet, but it also can't be so dry that it's not easy to form. And then I'll just lay it in place and start to work it into the void. The nice thing about this paper pulp is that it's really soft and it works really easily. As long as I take small sections, I can very easily get them underneath the overhangs and into this space where there used to be board. Now, the painting is face down on a piece of siliconized mylar or release film so that nothing is going to stick to it, including all of this paper pulp that I'm putting in place. When I was in college studying printmaking, I interned with a printmaker, and one of the tasks that was my responsibility was repairing his damaged prints and paper sculptures, of which he had many. This was the technique that he taught me and that my professors at college taught as well for making paper and doing small paper repairs. After I have filled all of the void by hand, I'm going to take a little metal spatula and just start working this paper pulp. Working it underneath the overhangs, into all of the voids, mushing it around, making sure that it is broken up and there aren't any gaps or hard areas, and just generally making sure that it fits into this void. Now, this paper pulp is very, very wet, you can see, and I need to draw out some of this moisture, but before I do that, I want to make sure that I get it as fitted as well as possible into this void. Because if I don't, I'll have to undo this work and start again. Not the end of the world, but if I can avoid having to do my work twice, well, I think that's very, very smart. Once I'm complete working that paper pulp, I will take a little piece of nylon release film that is porous and allows air and moisture to pass through, and then take a shop towel and just press this. And what I'm trying to do is draw out some of that water from the paper pulp through the nylon film into the shop towel. I'm not pressing terribly, terribly hard, but I am pressing enough to make some of that water come out. I want to start to dry this so that it doesn't take forever to dry. Initial pass, and it looks really good. It feels really good. But I'm not done. I'm going to make several more passes, putting very, very thin layers of paper pulp on, working them into place, and then pressing out the water. Lots of thin layers is a really effective way of building up a surface. It seems that you could do it in one pass, but multiple passes of a little bit at a time always yields a better result. And then once I've gotten it up to the surface that I like, I'll take that release nylon, then a piece of blotter paper, which is highly absorbent, and a little roller, and I'll just roll back and forth. This is to draw out some more moisture, but it's also to even out the paper pulp that I have inlaid into that void, because I want this to be smooth on the back as well as on the front. On the front, I have the benefit of pressing it against a hard surface, my table, so I can ensure that it will be smooth, but on the back, I'd like for it to be smooth as well. And then, you guessed it, weights. Lots and lots of weights. And I will replace this blotter paper many, many times as this is drying over a period of a couple of days. And then every once in a while, I'll come back and I'll check on the paper, change out the blotters, and see if it's good. And eventually, after doing that multiple times, I have a inlaid, dry, and flush paper patch. So now onto the cleaning of this painting, which is going to be very, very uneventful and very, very short because it is not dirty at all. This painting was sold and it went into a home where it was well cared for, except for the mysterious hole that somehow made its way into the board, but I digress. There isn't a lot of stuff on the surface, but I'm still going to clean it with a mild enzyme cleaner just to be sure. Partially because I'm going to be retouching on this painting later and I want the colors to be as accurate as possible. And also because eventually when I do put a varnish on it, I don't want to trap any of this grime or dust or dirt onto the painting in the varnish. And even though it's not very dirty, you can still see that some grime is coming up. So it's always a good idea to make at least one pass on the painting to make sure that it's clean. This is a very small painting. It is not very dirty. It is very easy. I like projects like this every once in a while. Not every project can be a magnum opus, and so something like this, which is a little bit of a change of pace and not terribly, terribly, terribly difficult, is welcome in the studio. And with that, the cleaning process is really all complete, and I can make my way over to the repair and the retouching. Before I do the fill-in, I'm going to add some more methylcellulose onto this patch. Again, it's to prime the paper to receive the fill-in medium and also to seal it up so that the moisture in the fill-in medium doesn't swell the paper and make it all distorted. Even though this paper has been pressed and even though it has methylcellulose in it, it is still vulnerable to moisture because it's paper. And so doing this step ensures that it won't swell up unnecessarily or distort too much when I add this fill-in medium, because of course the fill-in medium does contain water. Now I don't need a ton of fill-in medium. There's not a lot of impasto or really any impasto to sculpt. But what I do need is a smooth surface, because if I were to retouch directly onto this paper, well, we'd see it. You'd see it, the client would see it, I'd see it, everyone would see it, and it wouldn't be good. That's not what anybody is looking for. So adding this thin layer of fill-in medium allows me to get a really smooth surface and make sure that there are no divots or gaps or any other imperfections that would catch the light or your eye and betray the repair that I'm going to work so hard on to make sure is perfect. Once this medium has been allowed to dry, I can come back using my hands and just kind of sand it down lightly. My fingertips are rough enough that I can sand off some of this medium without needing to use an abrasive like sandpaper, because that would damage the original paint layer. Of course, I will come back with little cotton swabs and some water to remove any of the excess fill-in medium that I wasn't able to power sand off with my delicate fingertips. This is nothing all that complicated, but I do want all of this residue gone, and I don't want any excess covering up the original paint layer. That's kind of one of the things about retouching, is as best as possible, one wants to eliminate the possibility of covering up any of the original. Now, on a micro level, that's probably not possible because there's always some bleed over, but on a macro level, yeah, we don't need to do that. Once it's all done, I can feel that it is very, very smooth. Too smooth, in fact. Sometimes if it's too rough, you can see the fill-in. But if it's too smooth, it will also betray the retouching. So I'm coming back now with a heavy-bodied painting medium, and I'm painting in some brush strokes. When I look at the painting, I can see that the artist had brushwork, and you can see some of that texture there, just to the left of the patch that I created. And so I want to try to match that. And the best way to do that is with a brush and a medium that is a little bit thicker and will hold on to the shapes of the brushwork that I'm creating. This is kind of fun, and hopefully it will pay dividends later when I do the retouching at the easel. If not, I can take the retouching off and try again. The amount of retouching that is required on this painting is really very small, maybe 1.5 inches by 1/2 inch. But it's important that it's done well so that you don't see it. I mean, that's the whole point of retouching, is to make the damage go away. Now, there are many different schools of thought on whether it's appropriate to make the damage completely disappear or just to blend it in so that your eye doesn't really catch it until you examine it. This is all up to the client and the conservator, and there is no correct or right way to do this, particularly now that we have reversible paints. Everything I'm adding here can be undone by the next conservator if they choose a different approach or for whatever reason. Now, historically, this wasn't always the case, and so different techniques and approaches were developed to accommodate the fact that oil paint was used or non-reversible materials. But now, with better materials, we don't have to make those same compromises, so we really can work to make all of this damage disappear completely. Now, you'll notice that for this small area, I've made multiple passes and used multiple different colors, because it's not just one color of purple or lavender. There are subtle variations, and that's one of the tricks to making damage go away. Even in this green, which looks like one green, it's not. There's some oranges, there's some yellows, there's even some blacks in there. And so I need to be cognizant of all that and mix those in so that I don't have a completely flat area. Sometimes the lack of variation gives away the retouching. Sometimes too much variation gives it away. It's a delicate balance, but one that the conservator has to learn to play within when they're doing retouching. And really, the only way to do it is by making multiple passes. And then going back and making another pass, and another pass, and another pass, and so on and so forth, until you feel like you've gotten it right. And sometimes this is necessary because the colors change as they dry. Sometimes it's necessary because after staring at red for so long, it's really hard to see greens. And sometimes you just come back the next day and you look at it and you say, what was I thinking? What was I doing? And you need to make another pass. That's okay. It's nothing wrong with having to make a second pass or do it again. As long as you're working towards better, that's okay. Yes, we always want to get it right on the first pass. That's the gold standard. But that's absurd, and it's very rare that we ever get anything perfect on the first try. When we do, yes, we should celebrate and be happy and study how we got there. Identify what we did to set ourselves up for that great success. But if we don't hit success on the first try, it's not a failure. It's just an opportunity to try again for success. And so with retouching, that's really the name of the game. Now, this is a small enough painting that I'm not terribly worried about not getting it right on the first try. I also have a secret weapon. And that's the fact that I reached out to the gallery and asked them if they had a photograph of the painting before the damage. And luckily, they did. Now, it wasn't color corrected and it wasn't terribly high resolution, but it was good enough to give me a general sense of what should be here. And so I'm working from a photograph. It's off camera right now, and I'm just trying to recreate what was there. This is a rare instance. Most of the paintings I receive do not have photographic documentation from really, 6 months before they were damaged. But when they do, oh boy, is it a treat. It's really wonderful to know exactly what the artist created and not have to guess or make any editorial decisions, because that's one thing as conservators we try not to do. Sometimes we have to. If we don't have anything to work from, we have to make decisions. But if we have source material, well, then our job is really easy, and we can just focus on getting it right. There's no existential, emotional, or intellectual capital that needs to be invested here. I literally just have to copy what I'm seeing just to my left off camera. And that's kind of nice. With the retouching on the front of the painting all complete, I've decided to do something that I don't normally do, and that's turn my attention to the back. The client didn't request this. Nobody really cares. It's going back in a frame and probably getting covered up and then going on the wall, and nobody will ever look at it. But you know what? It's small enough and it's here, and I figured, why not? So I'm switching to a watercolor, and I'm going to just try to touch up this patch that I made just so that it's not so visible. Now, it's the back, so I'm not going to spend as much time on it, and I'm not terribly concerned if it's not 100% perfect. And the white balance on my camera was all wonky, so it doesn't look so hot at some points. But really, what I'm trying to do here is just to camouflage this a little bit so that it doesn't look so damaged. And you know what? To some degree, I'm doing it just to see if I can. And also because I allowed a lot more time for this retouching than it actually took, so I may as well use it on this painting, so why not? Here we go. Just like the front, it's going to take multiple passes, and the difficulty working with watercolor is that it changes. You see the dry color, then you wet it up and you make it soluble and it gets lighter. Then you put it on the paper and it looks great. You look down, you look up, and it's darker. So then you have to remix it and try again. And it does take a different mindset, a switching of how one sees color, switching from the front where I was using a synthetic resin and powdered pigments, retouching color there, to back here where I'm using watercolor. But you know what? That's the name of the game. And as a conservator, you just adapt to these situations. And it also is good practice for color mixing and using different mediums, because eventually I will have to retouch another painting on the front using this watercolor, and I can use the practice. Now on to varnish. While the retouching didn't take very long, the varnishing will take even less time. And that's okay with me, because I am loving this project. It just takes a few light passes of varnish, and then this painting is all complete. I don't need to do much to it. I'm not going to spray it from above. I'm not going to hand texture it. I'm just putting on a light layer to keep the painting protected and hopefully make it look a little bit richer and a little bit more vibrant. And there it is. Post-varnish, back into the frame, all conserved, ready to go back up on the wall and hopefully stay there forever. This wasn't a terribly complicated project. It was actually fairly simple and straightforward. But that's only because I knew what I was doing. And even though this was kind of outside of my normal practice, I had the experience from the past to let me tackle this project. And it was something I never thought I would need back 20 some odd years ago when I was learning how to make paper in college, but it has proven to be a valuable skill. It's kind of a lesson, and you never know when you're going to need a skill, so pick up as many as you can. But I digress. We can see now under a raking light that all of the damage is gone. We can't see that patch that I created. There are subtle brush strokes and texture, which was really critical in making sure that this damage disappeared. But more importantly, the painting just looks right now. It looks like it should, and that was the goal all along. So here's the painting before damage. This is the photograph that the gallery sent to me when I asked for it, and here is the painting after damage as it came into my studio. You can see how the rhythms of the painting, the image are all disrupted. But after retouching and repair, well, it looks like itself, right? I think the work is really good, but we have the original to compare to, right here. And we can see just how accurate I was or wasn't in retouching. I don't know. I think I kind of hit the target. And here's the painting back in its frame, ready to go back up on the wall. With all of the structural work complete and repaired, and the retouching executed per the original, well, the rhythms and motions of the painting are restored, and we can enjoy the vision of the artist without having to worry about any imperfections.